Imagine if you saw your dad or your granddad in a situation like this being embarrassed by a racist writer who's supposed to know better how to treat black old people with respect. What would you have done? Give me your thoughts in the comments section below. The Silver Spoon Diner wasn't fancy. It was small, tucked along a dusty roadside, its neon sign flickering in the evening light like a heartbeat refusing to give up. But to the regulars, it was more than just a diner. It was a place where stories were told, laughs were shared, and strangers became family. On this particular evening, the diner was unusually full. The smell of fried bacon, hot coffee, and homemade apple pie filled the air. Laughter from a group of teenagers in the corner mixed with the quiet hum of conversations at the booths. And in the far side by the window sat Franklin Miller, an 84-year-old war veteran. Franklin was a man of few words, but his presence spoke volumes. His wrinkled hands trembled slightly as he lifted a cup of steaming coffee to his lips. He wore a faded army cap, the kind that told anyone who cared to notice that he had once worn the uniform with pride. His eyes, though tired, carried the weight of battles fought and sacrifices made decades ago. Tonight, he just wanted a peaceful meal: meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and apple pie, the way his late wife used to make. But peace, as fate would have it, wasn't what he would get. The diner's door burst open with a loud creak, and in came Clint Hargrove, a man everyone in town knew too well. Thick, tall, and covered in tattoos, Clint wasn't the kind of person you'd want to cross paths with on a lonely road. He wore a leather jacket patched with skulls and flames, his boots heavy enough to make the floor groan under each step. He was part of a local biker gang that thrived on intimidation. But it wasn't just his size or his gang ties that made him feared, it was his venom. Clint had a cruel mouth, a hatred for anyone he saw as less than him, and a dangerous streak of racism that often turned words into violence. He stomped into the diner, scanning the room like a wolf looking for prey. Conversations dipped, forks paused in midair. Everyone knew trouble had just walked in. And then Clint's gaze fell on Franklin. "Well, well, well," Clint sneered, walking towards the old man's booth. "If it is Grandpa Army sitting here like he still owns this country." Franklin looked up slowly. His tired blue eyes met Clint's glare. He didn't flinch, didn't blink. He just set his coffee cup down and said quietly, "Evening." Clint smirked. "Evening, that's all you got? Don't you know how much I pay in taxes to keep old relics like you alive? Sitting here pretending like you're some kind of hero." The diner grew silent. The waitress, a young woman named Jenny, froze behind the counter. The teenagers in the corner leaned forward, wide-eyed. Everyone knew Franklin. They knew his story. They knew he had served his country when he was just a boy, long before most of them were even born. But Clint didn't care. Without warning, Clint grabbed a bottle of beer from the bar counter. He twisted it open with his teeth and swaggered over to Franklin's booth. "You know what I think about old war dogs like you?" Clint said, leaning closer, his voice thick with mockery. "I think you're nothing but fossils taking up space. You didn't fight for me. You didn't fight for my people. You fought for a country that don't even care about you." And before anyone could react, Clint tilted the bottle and poured the beer over Franklin's head. The golden liquid splashed down his cap, dripping down his weathered face, soaking his clothes and spilling onto the table. Gasps filled the diner. Jenny dropped a tray of plates, shattering them on the floor. Franklin didn't move. He just sat there, beer dripping from his chin, his hands gripping the edge of the table. His lips pressed into a thin line, his dignity holding him in place even as humiliation burned through the room. Clint threw the empty bottle on the floor where it shattered into sharp pieces. He laughed, loud and cruel. "Now you look like the washed-up, useless old man you are." The diner was frozen in shock. No one dared move, no one dared speak. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Jenny's hands shook as she tried to pick up the broken plates. The teenagers whispered among themselves, some pulling out their phones but hesitating to film, afraid Clint might notice. Finally, Franklin spoke. His voice was steady though soft. "I wore this uniform so you could have the freedom to mock me," he said, adjusting his soaked army cap. "But make no mistake, son, the cost of freedom is written in blood, and it's not something you could ever understand." For a moment, Clint's smile faltered, but then he laughed again, louder, trying to drown out the sting of those words. What Clint didn't know was that Jenny, the young waitress, had slipped into the kitchen with trembling hands and pulled out her phone. She dialed a number she had only heard Franklin mention once before, when he had shown her a photo of his son, Colonel David Miller, a decorated officer currently stationed nearby. Jenny's voice cracked as she whispered into the phone, "Colonel, you need to come, it's your father, there's trouble." David didn't hesitate. As the minutes ticked by, Franklin sat there drenched but unbroken. He dabbed his face with a napkin, ignoring the stares. His dignity was his armor, even in humiliation. Clint, meanwhile, strutted around the diner like a king who had conquered his enemy. He slapped the teenagers' table, demanding they laugh. He barked at Jenny when she came back out, threatening her if she dared call the cops. "Don't think I don't see your little moves," Clint snarled. "This old man ain't worth saving, he's nothing, just a pile of bones." But Franklin didn't rise to the bait, he didn't fight back. He simply sat still, sipping what was left of his cold coffee, his gaze fixed out the window as if he were watching memories only he could see. And yet, under the calm surface, a storm was brewing. Exactly 22 minutes after Clint poured the beer, the diner's door opened again. The jingling bell seemed to echo like a battle cry. Everyone turned their heads. And there, filling the doorway, stood Colonel David Miller. He wasn't alone. Behind him, in crisp uniforms, marched a small unit of soldiers. Their boots struck the diner floor in perfect rhythm, their presence sucking the air out of the room. Franklin looked up at his son, pride glimmering in his tired eyes. David's jaw was clenched tight, his eyes locked on Clint with a fury that could melt steel. The entire diner held its breath. And Clint, for the first time that night, his smirk faltered. The bell above the diner door jingled once more, but this time the sound carried weight. Heavy boots followed it, clicking against the linoleum floor in synchronized rhythm. Colonel David Miller stepped inside first. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his uniform sharp and his chest decorated with medals that told stories of battles fought across oceans. His very presence commanded silence. Behind him, 6 soldiers filed in, their expressions stone-cold, their eyes trained forward like predators zeroing in on their target. The diner, already tense, now felt like a battlefield. Clint, the biker, stood frozen near Franklin's booth. The smirk he had worn moments ago slipped, replaced with a twitch of unease. He tried to puff out his chest to act as though he wasn't intimidated, but his eyes flickered nervously between the soldiers, their weapons holstered at their sides, and David, who stood like a storm barely contained. "Dad," David's voice broke the silence, low and steady, carrying both respect and fury. He looked at Franklin, drenched in beer, sitting in quiet dignity, his fists clenched at his sides. "Who did this?" The question wasn't really a question. Everyone knew. The entire diner's eyes shifted toward Clint. Franklin raised his hand slightly, his wrinkled fingers trembling, not from fear but from restraint. "David," he said softly, his voice hoarse, "it's not worth it, let it be." But David's jaw tightened. "With all due respect, Dad, he disrespected you. He disrespected a soldier who gave everything for this country. That's not something I let slide." David took a step forward, his boots echoing like a drumbeat. Clint straightened, trying to recover his bravado. He spat on the floor and forced a laugh. Well, look who showed up, little soldier boy with his toys." He motioned to the soldiers behind David. "What, you couldn't fight your daddy's battles alone, had to bring backup." The soldiers didn't flinch, they stood like statues, their discipline unnerving. David ignored the taunt, his eyes fixed like steel. "You poured beer on an 84-year-old man, on a veteran who fought so you could walk freely into this diner. That's cowardice, that's weakness." Clint snarled, his fists balling. "I don't owe that old man a thing. He fought in wars that weren't mine. He fought for a country that spits on people like me. You think that uniform makes you better than me?" David stepped closer, so close that Clint could see his own reflection in the medals on the colonel's chest. "No," David said coldly. "What makes me better than you is that I would never raise a hand or a bottle to a defenseless old man. You attacked him not because he's weak but because you are." The tension in the diner was unbearable. Jenny, the waitress, clutched her apron, tears brimming in her eyes. She had never seen anyone speak to Clint like this. The teenagers, emboldened by the soldiers' presence, began filming on their phones, capturing every moment. Franklin sat silently, his weathered face calm but his eyes glistening with pride as he watched his son stand in defense of his honor. "David," Franklin's voice trembled, Please, son, don't make this worse. I can take an insult. I've taken worse in war. But David's gaze never wavered from Clint. You've taken enough, Dad. Tonight he answers for it. Clint's face turned red, rage boiling beneath his tattoos. He looked around, searching for support, but the diner was against him. Every eye, every phone camera, every heartbeat for Franklin and his son. You think you can walk in here with your little army and scare me? Clint barked, though his voice cracked slightly. This is my town. Everyone knows me. You and your fancy uniform don't mean a thing here. Is that so? David asked quietly. Before Clint could reply, one of the soldiers stepped forward, a tall black man with a calm but deadly look in his eyes. His name tag read Rodriguez. You talk about this being your town, Rodriguez said, his voice sharp. But this man, he pointed at Franklin, gave you a town to live in. He bled so you could stand here spewing hate, and if you can't see that, then you're already smaller than you think. The words cut deep, the diner buzzed with whispers. Clint growled, grabbing a chair and slamming it onto the ground. You don't talk to me like that. I don't bow to no one. For the first time, Franklin rose to his feet, slowly, painfully, but with dignity. His wet clothes clung to him, but his posture straightened, his voice carrying the weight of 84 years of battles, sacrifice, and wisdom. Enough, Franklin said firmly. The diner fell silent again. Even Clint froze, his grip on the chair loosening. I've faced enemies tougher than you, Franklin continued. Men with guns, men with hatred in their hearts. I didn't flinch then, and I won't flinch now. You can pour your beer on me, you can spit your venom, but you will not break me. His voice cracked, but his eyes blazed. Because I fought for something bigger than myself, for freedom, for the right of every man and woman here, even you, Clint, to live without fear. That's something you'll never understand. You think strength is in your fists, but true strength, he glanced at his son. True strength is in standing for what's right. The diner erupted in quiet applause. Jenny clapped through tears. The teenagers cheered softly. Even some of the older patrons nodded in respect. Clint's face twisted with fury, but now it was different. The crowd wasn't with him anymore. His power was gone. The weight of Franklin's words, the presence of David and his soldiers, the quiet unity of the diner, it all pressed down on him like a mountain. Get out, David said coldly. Clint blinked. What? I said, David repeated, stepping closer. Get out. The soldiers shifted subtly, their boots echoing as they aligned behind him. It wasn't a threat, it was a command. A command Clint had no power to refuse. Clint's chest heaved. He looked at Franklin, at David, at the crowd now united against him. For the first time in years he felt small, insignificant, beaten without a single punch thrown. He spat on the ground one last time, his pride bleeding through his defeat. This ain't over, he growled. But even he didn't believe it. With a slam of the diner door, Clint stormed out, his motorcycle roaring angrily into the night. When the door closed, the diner released a collective breath. The tension that had gripped everyone melted into relief. Jenny rushed over with towels for Franklin, apologizing through sobs. The teenagers clapped David on the back, thanking him. The soldiers stood proud, their eyes scanning the room, making sure the threat was truly gone. David turned to his father, his voice softened, the storm inside him calming. Are you all right, Dad? Franklin smiled faintly, though his hands trembled. I've been through worse, son, but seeing you here, that's worth more than any medal I ever got. David swallowed hard, his eyes glistening. He placed a hand on his father's shoulder. You'll never face anything like that alone again, not while I'm here. The diner grew warm again, filled with the buzz of voices, the clatter of dishes, and the quiet hum of hope. But outside, Clint sat on his motorcycle, rage still burning, his pride wounded, his hate festering. And as the soldiers helped Franklin back into his seat, no one noticed Clint making a call that would turn this quiet diner incident into something far bigger than anyone could imagine. The night outside the diner had grown darker, the air heavy with an almost electric charge. Inside, the silver spoon buzzed again with the hum of voices, relief slowly returning after Clint's stormy exit. Franklin sat quietly, drying his hands with a towel, while David and the soldiers remained on alert, watchful. But not all storms end when the clouds clear. Sometimes they regroup. Moments later, the roar of engines shattered the peace. Headlights pierced the diner windows. The low rumble of multiple motorcycles grew louder, surrounding the building like wolves circling their prey. Jenny gasped, pressing her hands to her mouth. "He brought his gang," she whispered. David's jaw tightened. The soldiers instinctively shifted, positioning themselves near the windows, their eyes scanning the shadows. Franklin, calm as ever, adjusted his soaked cap. "Clint, not the kind of man to walk away quietly," he said softly, "but what he doesn't know is that strength isn't measured by numbers." The diner door burst open again, slamming against the wall. Clint strode back in, flanked by 6 other bikers, each rougher and meaner looking than the last. Their tattoos glistened under the neon light, chains hanging from their belts, their boots tracking mud across the polished floor. Clint's smirk was back, wider than before. "Thought I'd just leave, huh?" he sneered, his voice carrying across the diner. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone. Nobody embarrasses me." He gestured to his crew. "Meet my family, and guess what, Colonel, we don't play by your rules." The bikers fanned out, towering over booths, their presence like a dark cloud swallowing the room. The soldiers straightened, their hands brushing against their belts. They didn't reach for weapons, not yet, but the room was seconds away from exploding. David stepped forward, his voice like steel. "You made a mistake, Clint, you came back." Clint laughed bitterly. "Nah, soldier boy, the mistake was thinking you could walk into my town and tell me what to do." He jabbed a finger at Franklin. "This old man's nothing but dust, and you," he sneered at David's medals, "you think this uniform makes you a hero? Out here numbers make you strong." David's soldiers shifted closer. The air was thick, the kind of silence before a thunderclap. But Franklin raised a trembling hand. "David," he said, his voice cutting through the tension, "let me speak." Franklin rose again, his body frail but his presence towering over the chaos. His eyes scanned the room, the bikers snarling, the soldiers standing firm, the diners frozen in fear. "Clint," Franklin began, his voice steady, "I've seen men like you before, men who think strength comes from fists, from guns, from numbers, men who mistake fear for respect." The bikers shifted uncomfortably, but Franklin pressed on. "When I was 18, I stormed beaches where real monsters stood, men who hated everything we stood for. They outnumbered us, outgunned us, and they thought they would break us. But we stood together because we weren't fighting for ourselves. We were fighting for each other, for freedom, for dignity, for a world where our children wouldn't have to bow to bullies." His voice grew stronger, his frailty falling away. "You think this uniform means nothing?" He tugged at his faded cap. "This cap is older than most men in this room, and it represents something you can't buy with fear. It represents sacrifice. It represents honor." He stepped closer, his hand trembling but firm as it pointed at Clint. "You poured beer on me, but you didn't humiliate me. You humiliated yourself, because a man who attacks the weak isn't strong, he's already broken." The diner was silent. Even Clint's bikers shifted, some looking away, their bravado cracking under the weight of Franklin's words. Clint's face twisted with rage. "Shut up, old man," he roared, grabbing a bottle from the counter and smashing it against the table. The sharp glass glinted under the light. David and his soldiers surged forward, their boots pounding in unison, surrounding Franklin in a protective wall. Their discipline was a fortress against Clint's chaos. David's voice thundered, "Put it down, Clint, now." But Clint shook, his pride unraveling. "No, I won't be made a fool of." The room tensed, breaths held, hearts pounding. One wrong move and the diner would erupt into violence. And then something unexpected happened. One of Clint's own men, a younger biker with a scar across his cheek, stepped forward. His voice was rough but steady. "Clint, enough." Clint spun, shocked. "What did you say?" The younger man's eyes flicked to Franklin, then back to Clint. "He's right, you crossed a line. This isn't strength, this is just hate." Another biker, older, grizzled, added, "I didn't sign up to pour beer on old veterans, Clint. That ain't who I am." Murmurs spread among the gang, doubt, division, respect for Franklin's words seeping into their hardened shells. Clint's grip on the bottle tightened, but his control was slipping. His empire of fear was crumbling, not under fists or guns, but under the truth. David stepped forward one last time, his voice calm but unyielding. "You've lost, Clint. Walk away now and maybe you'll have something left. Stay and you'll lose everything." Clint's eyes darted around. His soldiers weren't with him, his gang wasn't with him, the crowd was against him. For the first time in years, he was alone, truly alone. With a guttural roar, he hurled the bottle to the floor, shattering it into pieces. "Fine," he spat, his voice hoarse, "this ain't over." But even he knew it was. He stormed out again, this time with no one following. His gang trailed behind, some shaking their heads, others glancing back at Franklin with quiet respect. The roar of engines faded into the night, weaker now, like a storm that had lost its fury. Inside the diner, silence lingered before slowly giving way to applause. It started with Jenny, tears streaming down her cheeks, clapping for Franklin. Then the teenagers joined, their phones recording. Soon, the entire diner stood, clapping for the old man who had just won a battle without ever throwing a punch. David turned to his father, his voice soft. "You didn't just stand up to him, you changed the whole room." Franklin smiled faintly, his tired eyes shining. "I didn't fight tonight, son, I just reminded them what we fought for." David swallowed hard, his voice thick. "You're the bravest man I know, Dad." Franklin chuckled weakly. "No, son, the bravest thing I ever did was raise you. Seeing you walk in here tonight, that was worth every scar." The soldiers saluted Franklin one by one, their respect written in their eyes. Jenny brought a fresh cup of coffee and a slice of apple pie on the house, her hands still trembling with gratitude. News of the diner incident spread quickly. Videos from the teenagers went viral, showing the image of an old veteran standing tall against hate and a son arriving with the army to protect him. Franklin Miller became more than just a local figure, he became a symbol. A reminder that dignity doesn't fade with age, that honor outlives fear, and that true strength is not in fists or numbers but in standing for what's right. As for Clint Hargrove, his power dwindled. His gang fractured, respect for him evaporated. He had tried to humiliate a veteran, but in the end it was his own name that lay in ruins. And Franklin, he went back to his quiet life, sipping coffee at the Silver Spoon Diner, wearing his faded cap with pride. Every so often, people would stop by his booth to shake his hand, to thank him, to sit and listen to his stories. He never sought attention, but he accepted it with the same humility he carried on the battlefield. Because Franklin knew something Clint never would: respect is earned, not demanded, and honor never dies.